to the corporate persons and the personal insolvency. A basic glimpse I'll give about the previous regime of insolvency in India. So previously we had Companies Act 1956 followed by 2013 dealing with the provisions for winding up of companies. And then we had the Provincial Insolvency Act and the Presidential Town Insolvency Act that dealt with the insolvency of the individuals or other than company persons. Now what happened ki whenever there was a state of insolvency for a company, the winding up proceedings started and it ended around. So we have few insolvency of companies going on since 20 to 25 years. And even after 25 years, the creditors don't know when they are going to get their money. So if any one of you would have lent to someone, or if I would ask any one of you to lend some money to me, and after 25 years also you don't get back any money, so you'll be like, then I'll just waive off that amount and I wouldn't consider getting any repayment. Now this particular situation, we can see one problem there is the delayed or a process which is taking too much time, which was there in the earlier regime. Then the other thing was that there was too much courts interference. High courts were the adjudicatory forums for the winding up petitions, and also that also made the process very too much controlled by the court, and also that was also one of the reasons for the delay. Then we had the other forums like civil court taking the matters relating to presidential and provincial insolvency for individuals, and that also wasn't that effective. That's why there was really a need for insolvency bankruptcy code in India. Now, I can see this person Hanshal. I would request you to read the objects clause of insolvency bankruptcy code and enlighten us upon that.
Sir, sorry, but I have not a soft copy.
You can just Google it. And others, meanwhile, can download a soft copy with them, because I may pick anyone. Okay, fine. Meanwhile, you download a soft copy. I have other person, I think Karthik Surya, who can read the objects clause.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible enough.
One second, I'm downloading the soft copy now.
Great. You can read the objects clause then.
Sorry, sir. Can you repeat what we have to do?
So any one of you need to read the objects clause of the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So we have two moderators here, I guess. So moderators need to ensure that people read, otherwise you need to read the relevant provisions.
Okay. Sir, is this the right one? An act to consolidate and amend the laws?
Yes, read it out.
Okay. An act to consolidate and amend the laws related to reorganization and insolvency resolution of corporate persons, partnership firms, and individuals in a time-bound manner for maximization of value of assets of such persons, to promote entrepreneurship, availability of credit, and balance the interest of all the stakeholders, including alteration in order of priority of payment of government dues, and to establish an insolvency and bankruptcy board of India for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
Perfect. So now we got few takeaways from this objects clause, and this more or less covers the whole purpose of this code. One is the time-bound insolvency and restructuring of the company or any of the particular corporate debtor. And second is you have a properly monitored process in which an independent professional is in charge of the assets of the company and he takes over the company. Then you have other than that, you have an urge to for resolution rather than liquidation. So there is a difference between resolution and liquidation. I'll give a small example to explain that. Resolution is a process in which you try to improve the operations of the company and management of affairs of the company in such a manner that its performance gets booms. If the cash liquidity is down, then the company gets more cash liquidity, and the situation is balanced and the company performs better than it was performing before. This is the process of resolution. So by saying that resolution, it doesn't mean that the promoters or the management needs to be same. The management can be changed. Then can be new management which is taking over the control of the company and who will be managing the whole company and improving the performance. So there might be a situation that a company is failing just because it does not have fully equipped management or the persons who are not able to tackle with the issues. There might be a situation that there are a huge bank loan on the company and the company is not able to pay the installments and interest. So by this resolution process, there are at times that bank gives a haircut, what we call it in normal common parlance is a haircut or a discount over the loan amount. And for example, a loan amount is of 100 crores, the banks settle it for 40 crores and the company is able to, and a new buyer who comes in, he pays 40 crores and just gets the control of the company. And at the same time, it gets waiver over all the pending dues. There might be more income tax and GST dues of around 100 crores, which are waived off when a new management takes over the control of the company. And with new management coming in, there are new strategies and new professionals will be taking over the management, and which also boosts the performance and operations of the company. So this way the resolution works. Now liquidation is a situation that when the resolution is unsuccessful, that is basically 180 days under the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, the maximum time period, added by a 90 days plus 90 days extension being a maximum 330 plus any exceptional case extension. So after 180 days, if the company is not able to resolve or the resolution process fails, then the liquidation process starts. In liquidation, a liquidator is appointed by the court who takes the control and charge of all the assets of the company and starts selling off each of them and starts paying off the debts of the creditor. So that is basically closing down of the company. That is more or less similar to the winding up. Now, I'll give an interesting insight upon what is bankruptcy. Any one of you can tell me what is bankruptcy? Even a Google answer would work.
Sir, is it just going broke? A company going broke?
Broke in the sense?
Like financially broke?
Yeah. So somewhat you are near to that. Anyone else?
When a company is unable to pay.
Okay. Anyone else? You are much more closer to that.
So when the company isn't able to pay its debts to the creditors.
Okay, so all of you are right. Now, what happens is that there are two terms: insolvency and bankruptcy. Insolvency is an event which is rightly pointed out when the company is unable to pay its debts or unable to pay its liability. That is an event of insolvency. Now, when that insolvency is recognized by the court and court declares that this company has become insolvent, that is the bankruptcy event. Okay, now let's see what is the bankruptcy word, from where the bankruptcy word came from. So it has come from Italy, basically. So there was a bridge on which the lenders used to, not the lenders, basically the pavement businessmen were there who used to do their business and small trading through, there were merchants as well who were doing business through the bench. And when they were unable to pay its debts, on that bridge was routinely used by the military personnel or army personnel, and those were the personnel who used to generally lend their money to these merchants. And once these merchants were unable to pay its debts, in that case, the military personnel used to break their bench so that they are not able to continue with their business. This breaking of bench brought the word bankruptcy, because then Italian, this bankruptcy is bancarotta, 2 words, which means breaking the bench, and from that bankruptcy came. Now, these was an interesting insight over the words. Now, moving to the code, there are 3 kinds of, basically in 3 manners, application can be filed for initiation of process under the code. There are basically, if we talk about, there are 4 kinds of process under the code. One is the corporate insolvency resolution process, CIRP. The other is the liquidation. Third is the fast track insolvency process. Then you have the pre-packaged insolvency resolution process. So this is a new thing which came in last month. Now, these are the 4 processes. Now, the CIRP being the most important one, I'll start with discussing that. CIRP is a process. I'll give a small run through over the process. This process starts by admission of an application by the NCLT. Then simultaneously there are 2 things done by NCLT. One is it appoints a resolution professional to take over the charge of the company. Then at the same time it declares a moratorium. So by moratorium, what it means is ki no action, whether any suit or any court case, any litigation or any coercive actions, no and in this moratorium period. This moratorium period exists till the time the CIRP process is there. Now the resolution professional is appointed soon after the admission order. The resolution professional takes the charge. He has the duty of taking control of all the assets of the company, following which the resolution professional issues a public announcement in the newspaper of the area in which the register. In the public announcement, he states that these are the basic facts of the insolvency and the company details. All the persons or any persons in the public who feels that they have a debt against the company they have given any amount to the company, they feel like that, so they can just file a claim along with proof of payment or the proof of debt, and with the resolution professional in the certain prescribed time, whether it be 15 days, 30 days, whatever the RP prescribes. When that time period, the claims pursuant to the public announcement needs to be filed. After the claims are received, the resolution professional collates the claim. He checks upon whether the particular claim is valid or not. After validating, he forms a list of creditors. After forming a list of creditors, he forms a committee of creditors. Committee of creditors are those who the committee of creditors constitutes all the creditors who are basically financial creditors of the company. Now I'm giving a brief insight. We'll be going on into these terminologies later on. Now, this financial creditors are the persons who are forming part of the committee of creditors. Moving ahead, these committee of creditors are basically having a supervisory role over the resolution professional. Then there's a Form G, what we call invitation for expression of interest, which is also a public announcement, which is issued by the RP calling for all the interested buyers that anyone who is interested should come in and buy the company. Then all the EOIs are received. Then the COC in consultation with resolution professional checks upon all the resolution plans or expression of interest, and they choose upon which is the best person to whom the company should be awarded, and in which is the best, most handsome amount which the creditors are going to get. And further, after that, the COC approves the plan of one of the resolution applicants. Resolution applicants are generally the persons who are the buyers, prospective buyers. One of those plans are approved. After approval, NCLT has to again give the approval on this plan, and after the NCLT approves, the plan becomes binding. It becomes binding on everyone. Now, this was a whole insight of the CIRP process. Now let's go back and go through the terminologies. there are basically two kinds of creditors under the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code. One is the operational creditor, one is the financial creditor. Now, I would request any one of you to just read the exact definition of financial debt and operational debt. Any volunteers? Okay, no volunteers, fine. Then Mr. Siddharth, you can read this.
Yes, may I know?
Yeah, this is section 5, subsection 8.
Sure, sir. Just give me a second.
Yeah. And next would be Rakshita Mathur, who will be reading section 5, subsection 21.
Sir, I'm not able to load the statute. Sir, can you give me a minute? Just a minute. I should.
Are we ready?
Sir, just a minute. I'm not able to load the website.
Why you didn't keep it handy?
So I had downloaded it, but I cannot find it. I had I have made a folder Indian statutes. Yes, sir, I got it. So so section 5, subsection
8.
Sure, sir. Subsection 8. So financial debt, right?
Yeah.
Financial debt means a debt along with interest, if any, which is disbursed against the consideration for the time value of money and includes money borrowed against the payment of interest, be any amount raised by acceptance under any acceptance credit facility or its dematerialized equivalent. See any amount raised pursuant to any note purchase facility or the issue of bonds, notes, debentures, loan stock, or any similar instrument. The
Perfect.
amount.
You can hold on there. So A, B, C are the most important ones, and the two lines at the start are completely give a outlay over what is financial debt. So now financial debt is any amount which is disbursed against time value of money. So I have given you money, or I have given anything which depicts that there is a money which I have been given. So if that is the case, that is a financial debt. Any money which is against time value of money. So anyone can explain what is time value of money? Like anyone.
So is it the inflation plus interest or something?
Yeah, you're getting it right. I'll give you an example to understand, to explain to your friends in a better manner. Now, for example, you have 10 rupees today, and you can buy something, buy, for example, any product A. You can buy that product A in 10 rupees today. Will you be able to buy that product in 10 rupees after 5 years? So what will be the exact value of that product after 5 years? For example, it became 14. Today you were buying it for 10. After 5 years, you are buying it for 14. So that means the time value of money of that 10 rupees, that particular 10 rupees has a value of 14 rupees in future. That means that 4 rupees you have gained as a time value. to your 10 rupees. So any money you have extended as or disbursed to anyone is subjected to time value, because that money is no more in your control. And if had it been in your control, you would have invested it in the most profitable manner. So that is the concept behind time value. This is all what is financial debt. Now, other person who will read the operational debt definition. Under
Operational
5
debt
surplus
means a
21.
claim in respect of provision of goods or services, including employment, or a debt in respect of the repayment of dues arising under any law for the time being in force and payable to the central government, any state government, or any local authority.
Now, there are three kinds included in this operational debt. One is the payments to be made to the government, which will include tax dues, PF dues, and electricity dues, all kinds of payment which a company needs to pay to the government. Then other, it will include all the employee dues, workman dues. Then third, it will include all the payments in respect of any goods or services which have been received by the company, whether it be suppliers or any services taken by the company. So these are three kinds of operational debt. Now, this financial debt, operational debt covers each and everything. There is recently, through judicial pronouncements, we have got another class of creditors. Those are basically other creditors. Other creditors include certain rent dues, for example. So court has declined to consider the landlords or any person having the receivables for rent within this operational debt or financial debt. Now, there are three kinds of application which can be filed, which I have already told upon. One is section 7, one is section 9, and one is section 10. Section 7 is an application filed by the financial creditor. Financial creditor has to prove to the court that there is a debt and there is a default. Two things he need to prove: that there was a debt, and second, that there is a default. And after proving that, the application gets admitted. Operational creditor under section 9 needs to prove that there is a debt, there is a default, and there is no dispute. These are the three things which the operational creditor needs to prove. No dispute means any pre-existing disputes, because the law or the lawmakers presume that when there is a case of operational creditors, whether it be government, whether it be employees, whether it be good suppliers, these are highly likely events of any dispute being there. So always there is there in every company, this is there. So there's something which is the presumption. And so the person needs to give a declaration of no dispute, and other party needs to come and say there was existing disputes much prior to the issuance of demand notice or filing of this application. Now, moving ahead, section 10. Section 10 is a provision in which the corporate debtor can himself file the application. And so this is basically when I am the company and I have done a default, and I feel that going into CIRP is in the interest of all. So I just file an application myself, and just seek from the court that appropriate direction for admission be given. Now, with this, the process starts. Section 14 moratorium is being imposed. Any one of you just read section 14. Why we are not switching on our video, all of us? There is this person, Ayush Tiwari. I would ask him to read section 14. Yes, I think Mr. Ayush Tiwari is busy somewhere. Fine. So we have Rumela Biswas. I think you can read section 14.
Just a minute, sir.
Yeah.
Section 14. So is it about the moratorium?
Yeah, perfect.
So moratorium subject to provisions of subsections 2 and 3 on the insolvency commencement date, the adjudicating authority shall by order declare moratorium for prohibiting all of the following, namely the institution of suits or continuation of pending suits or proceedings against the corporator debtor, including execution of any judgment, decree, or order in any court of law, tribunal, arbitration panel, or other authority. B. Transferring, encumbering, alienating, or disposing of by the corporate debtor any of its assets or any legal right or beneficial interest therein. C. Any action to foreclose, recover, or enforce any security interest created by the corporate debtor in respect of its property, including any action under the securitization and reconstruction of financial assets and enforcement of Security Interest Act 2002. D. The recovery of any property by an owner or lessor where such property is occupied by or in the possession of the corporate debtor.
Perfect. You can take a break.
Yes.
Now, section 14.1 is the most important. It gives a moratorium. 14.1a gives a moratorium or a stay over institution or continuation of any suit or pending proceeding against the corporate debtor. By corporate debtor, I mean the company who is under insolvency, and I think by now we have got familiar with these words. Now, B says that transferring, encumbering, or alienating or disposing of any of the assets of the corporate debtor. That means the corporate debtor himself cannot sell or dispose of any of the assets. He cannot, for example, so we can see and derive the purpose behind this particular section. Insolvency is in place, the creditors are in control, and there is a resolution professional taking charge of it. And the meanwhile, the management cannot be allowed to sell off the assets and siphon off the money. So that is the purpose from which these provisions derive from. Now, further, any action to foreclose, recover, or enforce. So any of the bankers cannot use their SARFAESI rights and enforce the security interest of the company. Fourth is the recovery of any property by any owner or lessor where such property is occupied by or in the possession of corporate. This is a very interesting provision. So for example, the company is a tenant for a other person and company is having a premise on lease. Even in that situation, the company cannot be asked to vacate the premises, even though there is a long outstanding for the rent dues. So even when the company doesn't pay the rent, it cannot be asked to leave. Now, if we see the explanation just below this, it says that the company may be asked to leave, or the license or the lease may be cancelled if the dues in respect of the CIRP period has not been given. So what we need to understand here is that there is a date, which is the insolvency commencement date, which plays a great relevance in the CIRP process. That is the date on which the NCLT admits the CIRP process. On that particular date, all the dues are taken on record. So any particular claim or any particular debt which which is filed before the RP in the CIRP process, that needs to be a debt as on the insolvency commencement date, and it shouldn't be a debt in respect of any act done beyond the ICD. So any now, for example, a company is manufacturing. For example, a company is manufacturing any article A, and for article A, the raw materials are B, C, and D. These are the three raw materials which combine and form article A. Now, for manufacturing that product A is the main operation of the company, and the essential goods or the goods which are essentially required for the carrying on the business are B, C, and D. So the law says that, which is there in subclause 2 of 14, that none of the essential goods and services will be terminated only for the reason of payment during the CIRP period. So B, C, D are to be supplied. The suppliers who are supplying B, C, D needs to supply, continue to supply, irrespective of the fact that they haven't received the payment for the past supplies. For the past supplies, they need to file the separate claim forms, and as per the claim forms, they'll get the repayment. But for the CIRP period, they need to file, and from the bank account of the company, the RP has the authority to pay off the for the essential services received in the CIRP period, the RP will pay that off, and that will form part of the CIRP cost, which is something which is given priority over the secured creditors as well. This was section 14. Moving this with this, now we come to the constitution of committee of creditors, that is under section 21. Committee of creditors constitute all the financial creditors, as we have understood, and the definition was very well read by Siddharth. And this section 21 provides for constitution of committee of creditors, including only the financial creditors. Now, anyone can just explain what is the difference between a secured and an unsecured creditor? And some new hands I want.
So,
yeah,
I'm sorry, I have some issue with my webcam right now. That's why I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay. So as far as I learned, secured credit, we're talking about secured credit, right?
Yeah, secured and unsecured.
Yeah. So secured credit is like we are providing. If we are providing loan, we will be providing some our assets as a security if in case of such loans we are unable to pay them back.
Yeah.
And unsecured are those which are we couldn't, I mean, we didn't provide any assets in case of liquidation happens.
Perfect. You started right. You in midway you were right. So this is not concerned with the liquidation. Secured and unsecured are basically characterized by nature of a collateral or a security which has been given by the borrower at the time of taking of the loan, which was rightly pointed out by you. Now, whenever I take a loan, I give a security and I write undertaking to the creditor that in case I do the default, you have all rights to take this security asset in your control, and you can sell it off and get your amount back. This is what a secured credit is. Unsecured, there is no such security. It is mainly on the basis of my credit rating. And for that, the creditors are in line with the other unsecured creditors. They have no other recourse other than just asking for money from the company. This being the situation in the committee of creditors, we have a complex representation of secured and unsecured creditors both at the same time, so that there is a proper mix in decision making, and committee of creditors play a crucial role in the whole CIRP process. Now, with this, I think we have had a basic and a proper idea of the CIRP process. Now, moving to the other thing, which is the liquidation process. So once 180 days get completed, and it is not possible for I'll just ask someone to read this section. This is 31. No, not 31. It is 33. 33(1).
So should I go ahead?
Yeah.
33(1), where the adjudicating authority, before the expiry of the insolvency resolution process period or the maximum period permitted for completion of the corporate insolvency resolution process under the section 12, for the fast track corporate insolvency resolution process under section 56, as the case may be, does not receive a resolution plan under the subsection 6 of the section 30, or B, rejects the resolution plan under section 31 for the non-compliance of requirements specified therein, it shall pass an order requiring the corporate debt to be liquidated in the manner in this chapter, issue a public announcement stating that the corporate debtor is in liquidation, and third, require to the authority with which the corporate debtor is registered.
Perfect. Wait. Now, this was this was all. Thank you. So subsection 1 provides for when a liquidation order can be passed. An order for liquidation can be passed when there is a plan which has not been approved or rejected by the NCLT. Secondly, when there is there cannot be a plan B approved. So 180 days or the maximum timeline has been crossed and no plan could be approved and the process just got over. So in this situation, a liquidation order can be passed, or the COC itself decides that a liquidation needs to be done. In this relevance, there is a great judgment of Sinew Capital, Sinew Steel, I guess. Yeah. So Sinew Steel, you can just go ahead and you can just read it upon as a homework. So this is an interesting judgment in which before CIRP, the liquid dissolution order was passed. So this is an interesting read. Apart from that, let's just quickly see section 12, which provides for the timeline. Section 12 states that subject to subsection 2, the corporate insolvency resolution process shall be completed within a period of 180 days from the date of admission or application to initiate such process. So 180 days plus 90 days extension and maximum of 330 days is the process. On that failure, section 31 is there, in pursuance to which the 33 is there, in 33(1), in pursuance to which the liquidation order is passed. In liquidation, there is a fresh a liquidator which comes into existence. There is also a moratorium under 33 subsection 5, which says that subject to section 52, when a liquidator order has been passed, no suit or other legal proceeding shall be instituted. It's the more or less similar to the moratorium which we have seen in section 14. Further, the liquidator takes the charge. First, he need to attempt to sell the company as a going concern. What is a going concern? Do we understand what the going concern means? Anyone? Yeah, Hanshal, you can tell what is a going concern.
Sir,
I think
a going concern is a business that is assumed will meet its financial obligations when they fall due.
Okay, yeah, that is a general financial definition that is not applicable to IBC. That is the definition in France. Yeah, Shreya, you have anything to say?
So I think it's related that whenever the conditions of an insolvency are foreseen, so matlab ye ki it needs the operating resources to avoid bankruptcy. A company needs them.
Okay, somewhat near. Anyone else? Anyone? So we have only 3 people attending this lecture. Did I wrongly hear 40 at the start of the session?
Interns, kindly be interactive.
I'm sorry, there's a lot of rain in my area, so the network is bad. I'm not able to answer when I want to.
Okay, no issues. So you have been hit by an act of force majeure, an act of God, no issues. So where was I? Yeah, going concern. Going concern means कि the liquidator at first needs to sell all the assets as a whole and not on a piecemeal basis. So I'll just give a brief example. And I would require someone to be part of my example. I have one person with a great name. His name starts with Thang, and I don't know how to pronounce that. Yes, you can be part of my example. Okay. So, for example, you have been appointed as a liquidator by the court. And first of all, in which year are you in?
I'm in first year, sir.
First year.
Yes, sir.
Great. So you have been appointed as a liquidator by the court of a company, and you have been vested with the powers and duty to sell off the assets of the company and pay off the creditors. Okay. So I'll ask you 2 questions. two situational questions. First question is the company owns a soya bean plant.
Okay.
So it crushes the soya seeds and packs the oil and sells the oil as its product. It has a soybean plant. So in the soybean plant, you have multiple assets, such as you have boilers, you have huge tanks that store the oil. You have a land of 2 to 3 acres. Then over that you have some plants and some machineries which crushes the soya oil. You have a warehouse that stores the soya seeds. Then you have a packaging unit which prints the packaging and all. So that is all which is contained in your plant. Plus you have 2 trucks, which is also in the ownership of the company. Now, as a liquidator, you have been given 2 months to sell off the whole plant. My first question is, you have 2 buyers. One person is saying that, so you have been approached by 2 mediators, 2 middlemen basically. Those are not the buyers, but those are the persons who are promising you that within 15 days, they'll bring you the buyers for the whole plant.
Okay.
One person says that, I have identified that in your particular plant, there are 100 assets. There are 2 trucks, then there are 5 tanks, then there are 20 machineries and all. There are 100 assets which he has identified. And he says that I will choose 100 buyers and sell all those assets separately to them. I will sell one motor to one person, one truck to one person, one tank to one person. He'll do it on that piecemeal basis.
So he's the middleman here.
He's the middleman. The other middleman says that he has identified one person who is into the soybean plant business itself. And he also owns a plant which is hardly 2 kilometers away from the plant for which you are concerned about.
Okay.
And he is ready to buy the plant as a whole and not on the piecemeal basis. So which sale you will prefer?
Sir, I'll go with the single one, the middleman who says that there is only one, and then the buyer, which one is nearer? Because
any specific reasons for choosing this one?
Because sir, the cost will be how would I say, convenient for me, and then to negotiate between the middleman and the single buyer, it will be more easier for me also.
Perfect. So you should be in 5th year, not in 1st year. You have a sharp brain. So now this was a great analogy that you drawn. First is the convenience. You can't like enter into negotiations with 100 buyers and you can't sign the sale agreement with 100 buyers. That would itself involve a huge cost, which is there, because you are itself a single professional. You need to hire multiple persons to negotiate that. You can't have 100 meetings. So 100 buyers will have at least 5 meetings each, 500 meetings for selling one single plant. And whereas you have a single buyer standing in front of you. So and also in that case, that cuts on the total amount which is received. How that happens is, for example, you are selling a truck or multiple assets on piecemeal basis. That gives much less utility or value to each of the buyers, which is in cumulative, not so much as the whole plant will give to the person who is taking the whole plant. He has an object of getting the plant for the purpose of adding on in its own business. So for these reasons, you will choose this. So the option which you chose is a going concern sale of the asset of the company. So the law prescribes that first an attempt needs to be made to sell the plant as a going concern. That you can see in that is there in regulations, not in the section. That is something which so the going concern sale is something which needs to be given priority over piecemeal sales. Once the going concern sale fails, then the liquidator is authorized to sell the assets on piecemeal basis. Whenever a sale is done, there are multiple kinds: private sale, auction sale, which is there generally in general parlance. And in that manner, after the sale is done, the money is kept in a safe escrow account, and that money is then distributed to the creditors. Now, how you will distribute it to the creditors?
So is a question to me.
It was an open question, but since you have unmuted, you can answer.
Can you repeat the questions again? I'm
How you will distribute that? So you have sold the whole plant, you have applied your intelligent mind, and you have sold the whole plant for 50 crores. And you have a creditor standing of total creditors, whether it be financial creditors, operational creditors, whose total is 200 crores. So how you will distribute that 50 crores among 200 crores?
So, might take a few minutes. I'm not sure, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sir, is there any? Hello. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there any clause of regarding the same security creditors or like that? So, as far as I know, the preference would be going to those who have such security.
Okay. So great. So there should be a clause because there's a comprehensive code. So there should be a clause. But do you see any need of having such clause?
I mean, need in the sense, yes, sir, because otherwise, those who have get those who have get such priority while giving these secure assets, so they might be preferred. Otherwise,
okay, only secured assets, only secured creditors, basically.
No, I mean that preference must be given to them. Then only
to them, yeah. So actually, you're right. There are a mix of creditors in the total creditor list. There might be some people who have supplied goods, some people who have supplied services, some people who have supplied essential goods, some people who have supplied samosas and chai to the office staff. So you can have a variety of creditors in the company. Then you can have financial creditors who have given the loan on the basically the plant of the company. Then you have people who have given the loan to the director of the company whose guarantee has been given by the company, and there is no security in that. So we should have a proper rank list of these persons to whom we'll make the payment, and that would be fair for all. We cannot call it as an unfair treatment because Article 14 allows reasonable restrictions, and so this and also when we talk about equality, the principle which is followed is the equity, not of the equality. Equals need to be treated equally, and unequals can be treated unequally with a reasonable analysis or a ground. So this is what is done. You can directly jump to section 53, which is the section which is there for distribution of assets.
so for the same purpose.
Yes. So yeah, anyone was asking anything regarding 53? Did I add someone speaking on 53? Yes, Mr. Karthik Surya MR. I think you were speaking on 53. Are we having attendance of people?
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
So should I read the 53 section?
You can read 53.1.
53.1, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in any law enacted by the Parliament or any state legislature for the time being in force, the proceeds from the sale of liquidation assets shall be distributed in the following order of priority and within such period and in such manners as may be specified, namely insolvency resolution process costs and the liquidation costs paid in full. The following debts which shall rank equally between and among the following: workmen's dues for the period of 24 months preceding the liquidation commencement date, and debts owed to the secured creditor in the event such secured creditor has relinquished security in the manner set out in section 52. Wages and any unpaid dues owed to employees other than workmen for period of 12 months preceding the liquidation commencement date. Financial debts owed to unsecured creditors, the following dues shall rank equally between and following among the following: any amount due to the government and state government in amount to be received on account of the consolidated fund and the consolidated fund of the state in, if any, in respect of the whole or any part of the period of 2 years preceding the liquidation commencement date. Debts owed to a secured creditor for any amount paid following the enforcement of security interest, debts and dues, preference shareholders if any, and equity shareholders or partners as he may be.
Perfect. Yes. Now I'll just come back. Yeah. So I'll have quick questions. I'll put up some examples and any one of you can volunteer and give the answer in prompt manner. So I think we are having certificate for these sessions. Yeah. Is the coordinator there with us?
Yes, I'm there, but I'm not sure about the certificate. I'm just
Fine.
letting you know in a second.
Fine. So if we are not
But
having,
the
we can.
certificates will be provided to them while the internship certificate is being provided.
Okay, so fine. So if we have correct answers on behalf of our firm, we can have excellent certificates to certain persons.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. Now the example is I would request everyone to have a section 53 open in front of them. Once it's open, I'll start with the thing. Chat option is available for all.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So all of you need to write your answer in chat. I would be giving you an example, and you have from A to H, you have multiple classes of creditors in 53. You have to just write the relevant. Like for example, I give an example. I'll just this is an example. This is not the part of the rapid fire round. For example, the question is salary of Mr. So and so for a period of 14 months from 14 months before the date of insolvency. So where in which of these will it fall? And the answer should be, you can the answer should be B. B1 is the answer. B1 says workmen dues for the period of 24 months because the salary is for 14 months. So it will fall in B1. So answer should be B1, not C. Fine. Yeah, so we'll just start with the rapid fire. The amount of deposits. The first answer wins. So the deposits have been kept with the company. These are the money which the company has taken in the form of deposits. These the person are the deposit holders. In which of these they'll fall? No answers.
So can you repeat the question?
So there are deposits which have been taken by the company. I'll make it these are the short secured. D.
D, sir.
Yeah, D is the right answer. And the first person to answer was Karthik Surya. Fine. So I think I need a paper to write the names out.
So we'll be writing the names.
Said
So you'll be writing for me? Perfect.
Yes, sir.
Karthik Surya MR is the first person.
Okay, sir.
And the second question being the dues of income tax department. E1, yeah. So Karthik Surya again. This is the right answer. Now the third question being salary or these professional payment fees for the services of the resolution professional. Professional fee of the resolution professional. Anyone else to post? Okay, so correct answer is A. And the person who gave the answer is R.A. Ejisha, if I'm not pronouncing the name wrong. Noted?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now the fourth question being past 4 years salary, past 4 years wages of workmen. Yeah, right answer is F. Who was the first person to give the answer? Was this Siddharth Krishna?
No, sir. It was
It's
Hanshal.
Hansel. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. It's
Okay.
it's not.
Okay, Hanshal gave the right answer. Now the other question being, no, but this is not actually the right answer. This is not exactly the right answer. I asked for a 4 years payment if I'm not wrong. Two classes it will fall simultaneously. No. Mr. Anshal Verma, I already confirmed that F is right. So why you're moving on D? You need to put two classes. F is right. You need to guess the other one. Let's see who gets this one. Come on, yaar. I don't want to give the right answer. I'll just repeat. 4 years wages of workmen. 2 years wages plus 2 years wages. So wages for first year, second year, third year, and fourth year. This is the total wages. So in which they'll fall. Answer with question mark does not count. This is the right answer. You got it. We have one more person who gave B and F, but that was not specific. So this goes to Siddharth Krishna.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Now the last question. Last question is rent dues. So I'll give you a factual scenario before writing your answer. Just listen to my example. A and B, there are two companies, A company and B company. A company gave its office on rent to B company, and B company has not paid the rent for 4 years. Where this will fall? And whoever answers this will have another question. It will fall in one only. It won't fall in two. Fine. So I think we have three people who have given the right answer. Rumela, Enakshi, and Ankit. So now to these three, my second question is, why rent is not a financial debt owed to unsecured creditors? Why it can't fall in D? Anyone else who answers will be the winner for this question, apart from these three also.
Is it because of the term financial debts?
Okay,
Rent
yeah.
does not come under financial debt.
Okay, so where does it come?
I'm not sure, but that doesn't come under the financial debt. Financial debts are only those debts that are used for the capital that way.
Okay, were you there the whole session?
Is this operational? I'm not sure. I don't know the right term.
Were you there throughout the session?
Yes.
Okay, so rent is a other debt, which I explained like at some point of time. I think your network might not be proper, so you couldn't hear that sentence. No issues. Fine. So it is not a financial debt, not also an operational debt. For that reason, it is a remaining debt which will fall in F. Fine. So I think no one won this thing. Fine. So we have the winners announced, I guess. Fine. You can do one thing. You can send me a mail on my official ID with these names and along with their college details and all. We'll get the certificates of excellence issued.
Okay, sir.
Any questions? With this, I think we can end the basics session. If we continue again, we'll be dealing with the specifics of the procedure.
Definitely, sir.
Yeah. Any questions? Even if any one of you get the question later on, you can share the same to the law internships, and law internships will send a mail to me with those questions. I'll answer those.
Sir,
Yeah.
Natasha just raised her hand.
Yeah, you can ask.
So what is the meaning of debentures?
Debentures. So this is a question which is off topic today, but as you have asked, I'll give you an answer. Debentures are a debt instrument. If you are able to differentiate between equity and debt, so there are two kinds of manner in which a company can raise money into it. One is the equity, one is the debt. Equity is in the form of shares and the owner's capital, and debt is something which is raised from outsiders in the form of loan or credit. So debentures are a form of debt instruments in which you raise a loan from multiple people. So there are many people who give you loan by buying some certificates known as debentures from the company, and after so they buy that certificate and you get the money. That is the amount which is kept as debt with the company, and debenture are something which needs to be redeemed after some time, or they can be converted into equity shares as well. So there's a good read on debentures online. You can just if required, I can share you the details of the same. You can read through it. Debentures debentures have a debenture trustee who represents in the COC all those debenture holders. So this is what how can I relate it to IBC? But
All right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Is there any more questions? I guess no, sir.
I think
So-
everyone is clear with the basics.
Yes. So on behalf of Team Law Internships, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Advocate Rohit sir for taking out time from his busy schedule and interacting with the young minds. It was truly an enriching session, sir. Thank you so much once again.